Well, I'm back and I'm taking life on my two chins. So as you can see, I'm looking a lot better than I did the last time. I'm feeling a lot better, although the NHS is still trying to kill me. So welcome back to the Alphabet Podcast, guys. What you guys been up to? Hope you've all been well, and I hope you really enjoyed the podcast with Kelechi Okafor. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is we need to protect that woman at all costs. It was such an engaging conversation. I mean, I've listened to it myself since many, many times, and I must admit that from that conversation with Kelechi, it set me thinking about a lot of things in my own life. But before I just get onto that, because I really do want to speak about some of the reflections on that, because I think especially the topic of parentification, I feel like it needs a bit more justice. It's a term that some of you had heard of before, but as I gauge from the comments, a lot of you it's the first time that you've heard that term. So I didn't want to use the time that I had with Kelechi to kind of put my two pennies worths in. So I thought I would do a follow-up podcast where I kind of delve a little bit more into parentification for those of you that are curious to learn a bit more. But before I even do that, I feel like my nervous system, I need to get this off my chest. So, once again, I'm on this podcast feeling absolutely devastated, feeling a loss as a community, but being mindful that it's a very deeply personal loss. And I'm talking about the murder of Daniel Angerin this week over in Hainault. I believe that's how you say it. It's not an area that I'm particularly familiar with, nor do I feel like I need to be. But, within hours of this horrific terrorist attack, straight away the narrative was being put out there. It's not a terror attack. We saw the pictures and we could see that it quite clearly that it was a white male, and straight away it was like, it's not a terror attack. Now, I don't know if it's my neurodiversity or I'm truly from a different planet, but I need somebody to make that make sense for me. Can somebody please define terror? Because how much terror would be felt with a grown, physically able man parading around, slaying people with a sword-like implement at 7 o'clock in the morning? This man chose violence. Please define terror attack for me. Or are terror attacks only confined to people that are brown? And maybe it's because the man's name is Marcus and not Mo or Delroy. But straight away, you heard the narrative and that got me thinking. I thought, oh my gosh, what's happened here? What's really happened here? And it didn't take long to see the racist media back at work doing what it is that they do, desensitizing what happens to Black children. Okay, so The Sun, I didn't even know that as a paper used to exist. This is the same paper that used to have titties on page 3. I don't know if that's still the case, but this publication, absolutely horrific. And whoever thought it would be suitable language, I don't even want to repeat it, is how disgusting it is. But just in case you happen to miss the Sun's headline and the chaos that it's caused, they referred to this poor innocent child that was murdered on his way to school as Sword Lad. Okay, I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. Sword Lad. This racist media in this country, and a lot of people will probably have read that and probably didn't think anything of it, but straight away they have reduced this young child to what has happened to him. In what way is that appropriate? So it's already not a terror attack. Okay, we can't have that. It's not a terror attack, although it completely is a terror attack. But now we're referring to this young child as Sword Lad. His parents, his family, his friends could be reading that, and that's what his life has been reduced to for a headline. Absolutely shocking. I mean, I feel like I kind of need to move away from it because I'm feeling myself getting heated as I'm saying it. But guys, we really need to wise up to what the media are perpetuating. Okay? This young boy is not a statistic. This young boy was a remarkable young man an amazing scholar, and a tremendous loss to not only his family, but his whole community. They need to do better. Say his name. Say his name. Daniel Anjorin, say his name. Put some respect on that young man's life and call it what it was, a terror attack. I tell you, sometimes I find it really hard to kind of live amongst the world and what I see going on in it. But let me just move on. So we had Kelechi Okafor, amazing podcaster, amazing writer, social justice commentator. Anything that's worth anything, Kelechi's doing it. And she's so generous with her time. And you guys didn't probably pick up completely because I had it edited, but Kelechi had to sit through a quite awful experience where there was a lot of echo on her side. I mean, I didn't hear a thing, so I was oblivious, but there was a really bad echo. But she remained professional, and I believe she really was the perfect vehicle to start this conversation about, therapy, choosing the right therapist, exercise and therapy, and parentification. There was very specific reasons why I chose those 3 topics. I mean, I only had a limited amount of time with Kelechi, but I researched her for quite a few months because there was, a certain amount of time in between when Kelechi said yes and when we organised it. And I researched Kelechi a lot, and there was so many points of interest, so many things that, we really could have had a conversation about, but it would have been too long. It would have been impossible because there's so many facets of this amazing woman's life that, can be held up and you can see it as, just a survival story. So, we could have spoke about the sexual abuse, which Kelechi's been very open with. But, I feel like the parentification is something that happens. It happens a lot in the Black community, but as I'm speaking to more people of different cultures, I'm realizing that it happens in all cultures. I do think there are certain cultures where it happens more, but, it's a real big thing. For me, it's one of the main things that I'm trying to unpack in therapy as a parentified child and now a parentified adult, and not even realizing that I was. And Kelechi's encouraged me to be a bit more open about my story because, my parentification journey is one of the reasons why I wanted to become a therapist and why I wanted to do this podcast. But just to, tie up some of the things that Kelechi spoke about, the little fires everywhere, and they're not needing to be a major crisis or your whole life popping, mashing, cracking down for you to seek help. So I hope that part of the message was clearly understood because, sometimes we're looking for signs and, all the signs are there. Let's not wait for our life to come crashing down before we do things to make our lives better. But, we spoke about how important it was to have the right therapist that could understand all the different intersections of everyone. So, if you're a white woman, you might want to speak to a white therapist. It's not necessarily always about race. It's about not wanting to feel othered in that space. So, if you decide that, you make that really important step and you want to go to therapy and you've maybe gone through your GP, which is the route that most people go through, and they refer you to maybe a local IAP service or whatever it is in your community, we're very aware of the waiting list and how long it takes. But I do think people are still not aware that they do have a certain choice. You can request certain characteristics in your therapist. So you can request a Black therapist, a female therapist, a gay therapist, depending on the service and what counsellors they have available. I'm assuming that may or may not always be possible, but you definitely have the right to ask. And if you're going about choosing a therapist privately, your options, are a lot more. So you can go through the BACP website, me, myself, as a therapist. If you're a trained and, accredited therapist in this country, you'll be underneath an organisation. It's not just the BACP, there are others, but I'm a member of the BACP. And what you find when you go on the BACP website is a whole range of therapists. You can put in your postcode, what you're looking for. Most of the therapists there, they have photos But you can't always tell whether you're going to get along with someone by a photo. And just because a therapist is a black therapist doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to gel with them either. So the best advice I would give you is to select a few therapists and take advantage of the consultations that a lot of therapists offer. A lot of therapists will offer like free consultations, or reduced consultations where you get to, have a session with them, and you can kind of get the gist very quickly whether or not you kind of gel with this person, because it is very important that you have a connection with your therapist. It's a very important relationship. And one of the main things that we do as therapists is reparent our clients. So a lot of clients come with childhood traumas, maybe their parents were not emotionally responsive. And if that is the case, if I'm dealing with a client that has those kind of issues, it will be my job to help reparent them and be emotionally responsive. So that might be potentially just acknowledging the small little things that they do, because that wasn't done for them as a child. But you can, often get a good feel from these consultations and select the right therapist for you, because it's going to be important. A lot of people that have had bad experiences of therapy, it's because they've not gelled with their therapist, and it's put them off therapy completely. So I would say, don't give up. You will find the right therapist. The right therapist is out there for you. And if therapists are truly being honest, they can see when there's a disconnect. Like, I have consultations with clients, and there's been not many times, but a few times where I've kind of said at the end, I don't think I'm the right therapist for you. Making them understand that it's important that they have the right therapist for them. So there is that. But I also wanted to speak to Kelechi about exercise, because if you've just joined the podcast and not been watching from the beginning, you may not be aware that as well as being a therapist, I'm also a qualified sports scientist. And the mental health benefits from doing exercise are well documented. Exercise is as effective as medication for mild to moderate depression, but it can also help with anxiety. It can help with a range of mental health conditions. And a lot of people that, continuously exercise, they notice a decline in their mental health. Kelechi spoke about it. If she doesn't work out for a few days, feeling bad again. So it's a very good way to kind of promote and maintain positive mental health, which is why I wanted to speak to Kelechi about that. But the parentification, it was almost a bit of a cop-out for me, because I would have loved to have been open from the get-go and been able to speak to you guys and tell you why parentification is such a big issue and why I feel like it needs speaking about. But, Kelechi's open experience, I think she was the right vehicle to kind of introduce it. So if you haven't watched that podcast, Little Fires Everywhere with Kelechi Okafor, please go back and watch it. The value that it will add to this conversation is amazing, because I'm only going through the reflections. All right. So if you didn't see the last podcast, just to bring you up to speed, parentification are when the roles between parent and child are reversed. I like to put things simply, and I would put it simply as growing up too fast. Now, that can be for a number of reasons, which we'll get into shortly, but there are two main types of parentification. Okay, so we have firstly instrumental parentification, and Kelechi spoke a lot about this, and this is where you have responsibilities and physical tasks that are not age appropriate. So Kelechi spoke a lot about taking care of her siblings, but it could also involve looking after a sick relative, paying bills, cooking for the whole family, cleaning. And when I say cleaning, I don't mean telling a child to clean their room. It's important that we make our children responsible. So making a child responsible for their own domain does not qualify as parentification. But if you're having them clean the whole house, maybe grocery shop for the whole house, you see it a lot. Young children acting as translators for their parents that maybe don't speak the common language, maybe taking themselves to doctors and stuff like that. So that's the instrumental parentification. So that's like the physical, practical tasks. So, maybe some of you are sitting thinking, yeah, I did quite a lot of that. But, there are levels. If you're doing these things on a regular basis, it's likely that you have been parentified and may not even be aware. So the next type of parentification is emotional parentification. Okay, so that's like, being a mediator in adult arguments, listening and maybe giving advice to parents. I remember I've spoken about parents overburdening their children with adult problems. these things should be age appropriate. You should not be giving children unage appropriate tasks to do. You're making them grow up too fast. Maybe your emotional parentification may have involved providing emotional support to an upset, angry, or depressed parent. I've said it again. If you have mental health problems, it's likely that not only just that your child will develop mental health problems, but it's possible that their childhood will be actually traumatized by parentification. And that's also the same for maybe parents that have gone through addiction, so whether it be drug addiction, alcohol addiction. I'd expect to see similar type of things, but also witnessing a parent hurt themselves and others. So I've spoke about it on domestic abuse, and witnessing domestic abuse being a big ACE or adverse childhood experience that then goes into that child's backpack. But also, if they're seeing all of this stuff, it's likely that you're ruining their childhood. And if they're having to patch you up, maybe put a plaster on your bust knee or your bust lip, children should not be observing this behavior. So if you're in a domestic abuse situation and you're finding it difficult to leave, think about those children, because every situation that they witness is taking away a little bit of their childhood. But something that I want to add to it, it's not really something that comes up in a lot of the literature, but I've seen it up close. I've been very close to someone who's had this experience, and it's made me wonder. So kids who raise themselves, so they might not necessarily have been emotionally supporting a parent or taking care of a sibling, but they might have just been left to their own devices, not cared for as a child, neglected emotionally, physically, and just left to get on with it. So these children may have raised themselves. And I think there is a potential that they can grow up to be parentified too, but it not being seen the same by them because they haven't had this parental influence. But actually, you've had no parental influence. So you've grown up way too fast and you've raised yourself. And the emotional damage that has done to you may take years and years to come out into the open. So you're going to have issues in relationship. You're going to abandon people. You're going to do all of the self-sabotage behaviors because you've never had anybody to love you. So there is that as well. But what are the main reasons for parentification? Because me and Kelechi spoke about it not looking the same, not being the same. So, Kelechi's experience, she spoke about her stepdad and her mum separating, and then her parentified experience upping at that point. But also things like chronic illness and disability. So thinking about young carers, something else that I've also mentioned, it's likely that if you have a chronic illness or disability, that your child may be doing things to care for you that, is not age appropriate. And it might be that you don't have any other support and that's the only way, but it's going to affect these children going forward. Addiction being another big one, because, even with parents being physically present, not being emotionally present or emotionally available for their children at all times, and not being in the right mind to deal with their children's big emotions. But another big one is death in the family. And this made me kind of want to speak about my own experience. Parentification is something that has quite literally, and it's not something that I'm blaming my mum for. So I thought about this a lot before, considering to tell my story, because I thought, I don't want my mum to feel bad about anything because I don't blame her. There's times in my life where I've been angry with her, but I still don't blame her. Before you judge someone for their choices, you have to see the choices that they have in front of them. And I don't believe that she had many choices. But, my childhood and my experience of adultification are one and the same thing. My childhood ended when I was 9 years old, and my experience of adultification started then. I think before that age, I think I was always a responsible child, being the oldest of, at the time, 4 girls. So there's 4 years between me and my younger sister. So she would have been about 5. My other sister 3, and my other sister 11 months. So I don't have many memories of my childhood before the age of 9 until quite recently, when I actually went through my ADHD assessment. It kind of unlocked a lot of traumatic events. But if you ask me about my childhood and everything, to me, it all starts and ends at the age of 9. And my experience was the murder of my father. He was only 24 years old. He was stabbed to death. It did take a couple of days before the So please forgive me if I seem to disconnect, because I'm telling this story and obviously I don't want to be crying on a podcast. But yeah, he was stabbed, and 2 days later the machine was turned off, and yeah, that was that. But actually, it was a very traumatic experience in the first instance, because me, my sister, my cousin, we were asleep in the house. Now, my poor mother, who, this is the reason why I think it's so hard for me to be angry with her. If you can imagine the trauma of seeing the love of your life murdered in front of you, and then having to be responsible then for 4 children in the wake of that, and deal with your own grief. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. So my mum was there when my dad was murdered. And I never forget the day I found out my dad had died, because obviously this happened over the weekend. And I'd gone downstairs into the kitchen in my grandmother's house, me and my cousin, and we walked in. We obviously knew that the adults were talking about something because the door was closed, and we've walked in being kids, you're sensing the environment. And I remember my mum very blasé just saying to me, "Leanna, your dad's died." And I remember looking at her thinking, okay, and looking at my aunt and thinking, okay, nobody's crying. And then my mum very quickly sending me to the pharmacy, me and my cousin to the pharmacy to go and buy something for her. So I remember walking to this pharmacy, because we're in Deptford now. We're walking up St. John's Vale, and we're going to this pharmacy, and me and my cousin were looking at each other, and we're like, like he's dead kind of thing. And my cousin's like, we're both looking at each other. I'm 9 and she's 10. We don't know what that means for our life, but we just know that it means something. To me, I walked up that road a child and came back an adult, because I don't remember ever a day ever being seen as a child or being allowed to act like a child. And I think I took the lead from my mum's experience. And this is why I say, this is one of the reasons why I did the complex grief, why I've did things about knife crime. But, as older people and as parents, children look to you for their cues. So if a child sees that you're not crying or you're withholding emotion, they're going to think that's what they should do. So for many, many, many years, I didn't cry. I didn't see my mum cry. I didn't cry. So the first thing I knew, the first step in my parentification was to not become a burden. So I'm not going to overburden my mum with my sadness and want to talk about my feelings about my dad. I just need to step up. I need to help her look after the children. I need to go to school and be a good girl. And this is where a lot of the sadness comes from, because obviously now I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD, and ADHD is not something that I ever thought of as having. Now that I know what it is, and for the last 3 years being on the waiting list and people pointing things out to me, I've become aware that I'm ADHD. And ADHD is very loud, so it's what people see. But I've always felt like a fish out of water. And maybe in my 20s and early 30s, I started to, really believe that I am autistic. And I believe I'm autistic, and I'm going to get the diagnosis to confirm that I'm autistic. But the ADHD is a lot louder. So, I would be talkative in school and things like that. But then I always remember, I've got to be a good girl. I don't want to get in trouble. I was always told to sit up and sit down and shut up, which is also fine. But I just remember this overwhelming sense of responsibility. And it also not just being within the home. I think that period, there was maybe a 4-year period between the ages of 9 and 13 where my mum was just totally in her grief. She was physically present and physically doing stuff for us, but not emotionally available. And I think that's reflected in my 2 younger sisters' serious issues with attachment. Not to say that me and my older sister are not affected, because we are. Because disruptions to your attachment don't just affect you after the age of 2 and 3. It can affect you throughout your childhood. And losing a parent, the kind of abandonment issues that puts into a person is unbelievable, which is why I realize now I have to stay away from relationships where there's abandonment, because what it opens up for me is Pandora's box, and it's not worth going. But my 2 younger sisters have serious issues with their attachments and, mental illnesses to go with it. And there is also more neurodiversity, but, this experience extended into school. And I remember, being 9 and 10 and teachers coming into my class to take me out of my class to go and deal with my sister who was kicking off. I remember thinking, I'm not her parent, but it's that idea that somehow these Black children are older and more responsible, and we can just put that on them. Because I didn't see that happening with any of my peers. It's like, why would you call me if you can't deal with her? You either deal with her because that's what you're paid to do, or you call my mum. Like, school is my way of being a child. It was the only place where I was allowed to be a child. Please don't make me an adult at school too. I just want to be me and be free. And, thankfully I had good teachers that, they might not have been aware that I had this neurodivergence. I don't think it was such a thing in the 80s, but they realized that I was a bright kid, and minus distractions, i.e. other people to talk to, I could get my work done. So, it didn't really show up for me until I went to university, where the schedules are all over the place. And I will speak about neurodiversity in women, ADHD, autism, maybe on the next podcast, because it needs a whole thing. Because there's so many people that are listening to this now, probably thinking, tell me more, that may be neurodivergent and don't know. It could be affecting your life and you don't know. Some people want a diagnosis, some people don't need it. But just making people more aware of why they struggle with things. So, my parentification for the first 4 years, my mum wasn't really emotionally available. And, I was put in situations that, impacted on my safety. Speaking to Kelechi made me more open about it. I was sexually assaulted when I was 12 years old. And, I remember telling my mum, as Kelechi did with her own mum, and just her saying, just forget about it. Not to say that she wasn't upset and she didn't want to find that person responsible and do damage, but it's like, only not having the emotional capacity to deal with what your child is telling you. So I learned very quickly as well to keep things to myself. So whatever I was suffering with or going through, just to keep it to myself. And that impacted on my childhood a lot as well. And it's impacted on my trust issues. And I think when I got to about 13 and my mum was a lot more present and, she's got over her grief a bit, she's now working 2 jobs. So I always had my grandmother, my maternal grandmother there. My dad's family were the big family. And, through no fault of their own, I don't blame them either. After my dad died, they didn't help in any way. I don't think they could have, but they didn't help in any way. They didn't support my mum in any way. They didn't help her in any way. My mum was doing it by herself. She's not from a big family. She only had her mum. So that's why I have a close relationship with my maternal grandmother, because she stepped in a lot of the time. So I remember my paternal grandmother a lot more when my dad was alive. I spent a lot of time there with my cousins, and, it was a great life. But after my dad died, that changed, and my mum was by herself. So, when it's time to be angry, I can't just be angry with my mum. What about the other adults? Sometimes I get angry with them and think, can you not see that I'm doing too much here? That I'm quiet and I'm compliant, but inside I'm screaming. I just want to be a child. I don't want to cook. I don't want to look after my sisters. I don't remember my mum ever getting a babysitter. So that's something that we can do as parents. Don't just think, I've got an oldest child that can look after these kids. Just put it on them. It's not their responsibility. Get a babysitter. That's what they're for. An adult to supervise all your children, not your oldest child to supervise your other children. That's not fair. And I think as a teenager, I became more resentful. My mum used to go abroad and she'd have my nan be the main person looking after us. But we were all teenagers and running rings around my nan. So a lot of the responsibility fell to me. Then her being at work and me having to cook, and there was never much thanks. It was always just expected, and even in my 20s and 30s, moving out, separating, always feeling that sense of guilt and shame, like I'm responsible for my mum, for my sisters. And it wasn't true. And speaking with Kelechi, she's let me see how it's manifested. As a parentified child, it comes out in so many ways. Like, I struggle to understand my own desires and my own needs. Okay? I have issues with boundaries. And that makes it really hard for me to develop a strong sense of self in relationships. So as a result, I not only attract the wrong type of people, but I accept them. And I've done a lot of work in therapy, and in theory, I understand. But I need to go back to therapy, because not only am I attracting, but I'm also accepting the same type of partners. I'm recasting the same characters. And that is because even though I understand in principle to love myself, not only do I not know how to do that, I've never really had anybody show me love in the right way. So my experience of love is something that I'm making up as I go along. So I often treat people how I want to be treated, love them how I want to be loved. and it never happens in return. So I've had to accept that it's something that I'm doing. So that conversation with Kelechi has inspired me to go back to therapy. I'm tired of being abandoned. I've had enough abandonment in my life. I want what I give out. I don't want to be the only one spending money or making plans or investing. I want the same in return. And that's what I got from Kelechi. So if you're sitting here listening to this now and thinking, was I parentified? Does my experiences count as parentified? I think you really need to take a look at it. What's your relationship like with your parent now? What's your relationship like with your siblings? But what to do if you actually realize that you have been parentified. So the first thing and the most important thing, and it's the hardest thing, is to acknowledge that it happened, because you've built your own narrative as to why you've given up your childhood. I had to do it because I'm in service of my mom. I need to help. But sometimes in doing that, you do not acknowledge what's happened to you. You've gone through parentification trauma. So the first thing is to acknowledge that this has happened to you. And that may involve feelings of anger. And it may make you look at people differently. And that's to be expected. But then you need to notice how parentification affects your life. So really take a close look. Look at your relationships. Look at your past relationships. Can you see any patterns? Is the repetition compulsion? Are you recasting the same characters? Are you doing the same things? Have you got issues with boundaries? Are you people pleasing? Are you too compliant? Are people walking over you? Evaluate the past. Look at the good and the bad and really notice. And then the most important part is learning to parent yourself. So you have to reparent yourself. Now, as you can go to therapy and a therapist can help you with this, or you can just have a conversation with that smaller you. So this is what I've been having to do in the last few weeks, because I've been in a really awful place. And because I'm so parentified and I don't tell people what I'm going through. Like my friend said, you always say you're fine, so people think you're fine. So I've been in a really, really low place, and I've been there by myself. And what I've had to do is use my skills as a therapist and parent myself. So there's times where I've gone into the room and now I'm talking to 5-year-old Lee, 6-year-old Lee, and 9-year-old Lee. I'm going into my childhood room and I'm speaking to that little girl and I'm telling her it's okay. You're safe now. Nobody can hurt you anymore. So it's learning to reparent yourself and seeking therapy if necessary, because now you have to be the adult that you needed. And I see it a lot. I've seen it, a bit recently with, adults that are, unhealthily connected to their parents. Like, you're not here to relive your parents' life. Your parents should not be controlling your life as an adult. If they were doing that as a child, you maybe didn't have a choice. But you really have to look at it as if you're still allowing your parents to run your life as an adult. It's your life. And depending on what you believe, we're only here once. Break those unhealthy ties. You're not a child anymore. You are an adult, and you can have some say in it. So you may have to be the adult that you needed, So I'm hoping that that's helping some people. I really am. And, I've put a few things up on social media because I've been doing this project now for 10 months. I started last year, July. Obviously, there was a lot of preparation before and I was being scared to put myself out there. But I said from the very beginning that I'd give it a year and I'd see. And I think the first few months, the momentum was kind of there and we got to maybe 50 or 60 subscribers quite quickly. But then it really, really, really died down. And, as much as I find these podcasts anxiety inducing, I feel such a relief when I manage to get this content out there. And I really do want it to connect with people. And if it connects with just one person, then it's been worth it. But what I don't like so much is all the hard work. It's hard work having to push things on social media. Mental health is not a popular topic. I'm not flicking my booty. I'm not saying anything scandalous. There's no tea here. It's just real life. And I think, something that Kelechi said really resonated with me. People will discover things when they discover it. So it may be that when my year's up, that, I stop this podcast in this format. I mean, I'll still do other things. My friends suggested to me maybe a sister circle that I do with a few of my friends. if I ever get to 100 subscribers, I can go live on my PC and do different stuff. I have a big following on TikTok, so the future is looking like doing more live stuff over there where you get more interaction and you kind of know what the audience wants to learn about, because it's very difficult coming up with content when I don't know what it is that you guys are struggling with. I've said from the very beginning, hit me in the comments, like, share. And I think some of you do it and some of you listen and you think, oh, okay, that was interesting. But the message only gets spread if you share. I can only extend my reach so far, so I'm closely looking at what to do when this year's up, because I like to see things through to the end. The ADHD makes it hard because I like to just change my mind and do something random. But I've been very, very strong with this. Like my friend said, you've persevered with this, Lee. Now you've been doing this for a while. And I do want to thank, because I've not really had the chance to, the 3 girls at the beginning that I sat around that table with in Tulse Hill. So Remy, Ty, Louisa, that first encouraged me to keep up this podcast when I was just like, forget this. This is too hard. Like, I'm trying to get guests. People are saying yes, and then they're saying no, and then they don't answer the phone. And it's like, yeah, I got tired of chasing people. So there's a few people that I've contacted about coming on this podcast, and the invitation is still open. I still think that we can do some good things. Nick, CEO, I've read your book, ADHD aside. I finally picked the book up. It only took me 2 hours to read it. So my superpower is once I commit to something, I can speed read. I've got all that information in there and I've got some questions. So, if you're in a place where you feel like you want to come on and, share some ideas, then by all means, Nick, CEO, that invitation is always open to you. I'm going to bring my friend on in the next couple because she's been itching to get back on here since the boundaries, and she's got a very engaging personality that I think a lot of people will resonate with. I'm a bit dry. My tone is a bit monotonous. My face is a bit serious. I ain't that cute. So I know it's hard to maintain attention. So I'm trying to keep this podcast short and just fill it with information rather than make it longer and people drift off. So yeah, coming up, I'm probably going to do something on neurodiversity in women because I do think it needs to be looked at, and especially Black women, once again, how it presents, because women are underdiagnosed and Black women even more underdiagnosed. So part of the reasons why I'm pursuing the diagnosis is not because I don't know what it is that I struggle with. I already know. I didn't need a diagnosis to tell me, but I'm hoping that some of my friends now will understand that I'm no longer going to be masking, because it's the masking that has taken it out of me over the years. It's not me having ADHD or me potentially being autistic. It's not that. It's all the pretending that goes into just trying to fit in. So, guys, please keep inviting me to stuff. I will try to turn up if I can, but, as I found out last weekend, I'd been invited to something with my best friend and we planned it the whole week and I was excited. And when it got to today, I was terrified, but I still went out, and there was a point in the evening where she was like, Lee, you can really go if you want to, because I can see how uncomfortable it is for you. So her finally being able to see that I'm no longer masking and this is what my reality is like. But obviously I didn't leave her. I ain't leaving. If you go to the club with your friend, you leave the club with your friend. So Bianca, there was no way I was leaving you in that club, babes. Like how them brothers were ready to snatch you up. You were not getting left, my darling. But I just need people to understand that some of the things that I used to do, so you would catch me with a drink or 2 or 10, and then I'll be acting wild because now I'm drunk and I'm trying to hide the fact that I don't want to be here. So now, guys, if you invite me to something, I'll try and come. If I can't come, please show some understanding. I'll try to find a different occasion where there's maybe not so many people and we can do something one-on-one, or you can come and see me at my house. I'm very comfortable there. Or I can come and see you at your house. I'm also comfortable in those kind of surroundings. But, I'm no longer putting myself in situations that make me uncomfortable, because sometimes it's taken me 2-3 days after being so social to actually want to get out of bed. And this is the struggle that people don't see. They see, you might see the 8 hours of functioning, but you might not see the 4 hours of preparation that goes into it and the 4 hours of despair afterwards when I get home and I just have my peace. So, neurodiversity needs speaking about, because I think people just hear things like ADHD, ASD, oh, it's nothing. You just need to learn to manage it. And I've had a lack of compassion from people that I would have expected a bit more common sense from. The idea, well, you've had it all your life, so why can't you just deal with it? You don't know what I've been dealing with my whole life. I made this shit look easy. I've had whole meltdowns. I've procrastinated to the point where I'm like, why can I not start this piece of work? Why am I struggling so much when I know I'm intelligent? Why can't I do anything? So who feels it knows it. So if you don't know what you're talking about, I'll always tell you to keep your mouth quiet, because what you say can be really, really harmful to people. And maybe because you might have similar struggles and you maybe deal with it by avoiding your triggers completely, that's not healing either. So don't be judgmental about others. I think my ADHD would have stayed quite dormant if I wasn't challenging myself in life, if I wasn't trying to study more, if I wasn't trying to learn more and do more. I wouldn't have come against this block again, and I wouldn't have realized how much it's affected me. So it's coming out of your comfort zone and pushing yourself forward. That is sometimes when you realize that there's an issue. And for me, like I said, it was when I was at college. I could do the work, no problem, but I was tying myself up in knots and not being able to start things. So the procrastination is a big, big, big symptom in women. So if you're a perpetual procrastinator, it could be that it's a little bit more than just procrastination, because that is a big, big sign of ADHD. So we'll get into that. But hopefully now my friends are a little bit more aware. You guys, if you've got any more questions about parentification, obviously there's the topic of adultification, where this happens outside the home. But time permitting, and whether this podcast continues will probably be whether I decide to put that on there. I think for now, parentification is enough for people to be getting their head around. And I seriously want people to not feel bad. And you're going to feel all types of ways, because there's parts of your childhood that's been taken away from you that you can never get back. But, at least if you're having children, like Kelechi said, it's very important that you have boundaries. So the things that your children are doing should be age appropriate. You need to have physical boundaries, emotional responsiveness, and do not overburden your children. Please stop doing it, because it's going to show up in their backpack, and they're going to be parentified adults that don't understand their needs and get walked all over in life. So, I hope in my story now, I'm being a bit more open as this podcast comes to an end, but I wish I could just tell, my whole story. But there's other people that are involved in the story, so, I have to be mindful. But I'm hoping that I've been as honest as I can, and you understand my motivations. So everything I've covered so far on this podcast are things that have affected me in my own life. And I'm not unique or special. So I know that there are people out there that are starting to see patterns in themselves. And never, ever, ever be afraid to ask for help. Help is the most powerful word that you can say. And it's the bravest word a lot of the time. I just need some help. So, if anyone's ever brave enough to come to me and say they need help, I'm going to give them as much help as they want. So just keep being kind to each other. Bun this racist media. We ain't listening to them no more. And just try and stay positive. The weather's a bit crap, but make sure we're expressing gratitude and trying to do the things to keep our mood up. So I hope this podcast will help, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks, and I'll be talking about neurodiversity, and I haven't decided yet. So it'll be just as much as a surprise for me as it is for you. But yeah, guys, have a good week, because when this goes out, it might be Monday. It probably will be Monday, or I might put it out later. It depends. But yeah, whatever you're doing, have a good couple of weeks. And if you have any questions, please hit it up in the comments. If something has resonated with you, please share. Because at least if we can get to 100 subscribers before July, some live segments can be put in. Really need your support with this. So, if you've been sharing, thank you. If you haven't so far, you can start now. If there's something I've said that you don't agree with, hit me in the comments. People are not always going to agree with me. And the aim is not to agree with me. I want to have a discussion. So I need your opinions and your feedback. So please hit me in the comments, hit the likes. So I'm going to go off and do some self-care, because, having to go into my childhood with all of the ADHD assessment stuff has opened up, like I said, some boxes. And I've just been being kind to myself. So this whole weekend is going to be self-care. Nothing that doesn't serve me will be getting done. And yeah. So I'm going to go, and I'll see you soon.